Good day, everyone.
I am Rhea Vitagra and I am your first presenter for the day. So my topic is all about the elements of communication. So what are the elements of communication? Elements of communication refers to essential tools of communication on which the communication process is conducted. Elements of communication initiate and regulate the entire cycle of sharing information between the sender and the receiver. Therefore, communication elements are essential and interconnected parts of the communication process. There are 9 elements of communication process. So what are those elements of communication process? Let's go and find out. So here are the 9 elements of communication. So the 9 elements of communications are the sender or speaker, the message, decoding, channel, listener or receiver, feedback, decoding, interference or noise, situation, environment or context. So, what is a speaker or sender in communication? So, it is the person who is presenting a message to a listener. A sender is also known as the encoder of the message. The sender initiates the communication process, and start the procedure by sending a message or information. So, therefore, a sender is a speaker, writer, or a person who provides the information to share opinions, ideas, and message. So, I have here the example of a speaker or a sender. So, example of speaker or sender. Edeline is the sender and encoder who sends messages to communicate with her friend. So the sender is the person who sends the message to share with others. So Edeline here is the sender and also the encoder of the communication process. So therefore Edeline is the sender and also an element of the communication process. So the next one is the message. The message is whatever a speaker communicates to someone else. It refers to the information, ideas, feelings, opinions, thought, attitude, and view that the sender wants to deliver to the receiver. So the message seems like a key element of any communication process. Any communication convey the message, also known as sharing ideas, feelings, opinions, thoughts, and information. Always, the sender wants to convey the message to communicate with the receiver. So, senders need to ensure that the main objective of the message is clear and understandable. Messages may convey through verbal and nonverbal cues. Verbal cues are the spoken language and the speaker, for instance, spoken words. On the other hand, the most common types of nonverbal communication are facial expressions, eye contact, physical appearance, posture, gestures, etc. So I have here also the example of message. Jana Lee was speaking to convey a message that indicates verbal communication. She also showed her angry face to her sister to reduce the TV volume, called nonverbal communication. So, the moment that Jana Lee showed her angry face to her sister to reduce the TV volume, so through her facial expressions, she conveys the message. So did you get the point? So the next is encoding. Encoding means transforming abstract opinions and ideas into symbols such as words, pictures, signs, and marks. A symbol might represent or indicate opinions, statements, and actions. So encoding on contrast, is the process of transformation of the subject into symbols. So the encoding process is related to the sender and the receiver. So the message of any communication is always abstract and intangible. Transmission of the message requires the use of certain symbols. So the example of encoding is that Julina has converted her thought into words to convey the message to her friend, called encoding. Here, converting thought into words is the process of encoding. Words serve as the spoken communication symbol. She called her friend and uttered some words to share an opinion as well as send a message. So the next is channel. The channel is the means by which message is communicated. When you pick up the phone to call a friend, the telephone is the channel. So, example of this is that Grace has transmitted the message through a smartphone. So the smartphone is the channel of the communication process. Since channel is the way or tool of transmitting the message, it is also known as a medium in communication that conveys the message from sender to receiver. Communicators use different channels to communicate in distinct contexts of communication. So in face-to-face communication, the sender senses such as hearing, seeing, smelling, touching, and tasting are the channel of transferring the information. It is also one of the crucial elements of the communication process. On the other hand, organizations use television, newspapers, and radio to disseminate information. People use the computer and mobile phone to communicate with a person who lives far away from each other. Many people use free online meeting platforms to conduct virtual group meetings. Sometimes people choose a written medium such as letter to convey the message, while others prefer an oral medium when spontaneous feedback is required from the recipient. So here in my example that Grace has transmitted the message through a smartphone, so the smartphone is the channel of the communication process. She uses technology to convey a message, Therefore, it is called mediated communication. So the next one is the listener or receiver. A listener or receiver is the person who receives the communicated message. Without a listener, there is no communication. So a receiver is a person for whom the message is targeted in contrast to the sender. Therefore, the receiver is the audience of the communication process that decodes the message to perceive the meaning. The sender surely sends a message aimed at the receiver. So, the receivers can be one person or a group of people or a big amount of population. The degree to which the decoder understands the message depends on various factors such as knowledge of the recipient, their responsiveness to the message, and the reliance of the encoder on the decoder. So example of listener or receiver. Desiree has sent the message targeted at her system to whom she wants to communicate. Hence, her sister is the receiver in the process of communication. So here, Desiree is the sender and her sister is the listener or the receiver, which is her sister is the receiver in this context of communication or the process of communication. So the next is feedback. Feedback refers to the response of the receiver or audience. Like, for example, when the president addresses the nation on television, he is engaged in one-way communication. You can talk back to the television set, but the president won't hear you. Most situations, however, involve two-way communication. Your listeners don't simply absorb your message like human sponges. They send back messages of their own. The messages are called feedback. Sense feedback. This is the element that is the reaction or response provided by the receiver. So, the next one is decoding, means giving meaningful interpretation to the message. The receiver translates symbols into meaningful information to the best of his ability. So decoding is the process of translating an encoded symbol into the ordinary understandable language in contrast to the encoder. In this process, the receiver converts the symbols into thoughts received from the sender. Decoding is the opposite process of encoding to get the meaning of the message. So example of decoding is Jason Ray has transformed her thought into words to convey the message to her sister, called encoding. At the same time, her sister converts those words into thought to understand the message. That is the process of decoding. So did you get the point? When Jason Ray transformed his thought into words to convey the message to her sister, it is called encoding. Well, while at the same time her sister converts the message or receives the message, she converts those words into thought to understand the message. So that is the process of decoding. So that is decoding. So the next is the interference or noise. Is anything that impedes the communication of a message. This is the unwanted element of the communication process that communicators always want to avoid during the interaction. Why? Because noise refers to the communication barrier or obstacles to effective communication. It is also known as communication noise or noise in communication. Since noise in communication is any barrier that obstacle the effectiveness of the communication process. Actually, noise exists in all kinds of communication, such as face-to-face communication, group communication, mediated communication, and other communication. Communication will be more effective and interactive if there is no noise. Since noises are unnecessary elements of communication that distract receivers from receiving the message. So noise distracted the receiver to receive the message or understand the message. So I have here the example of noise. So example of interference or noise. Christina's sister watched a cartoon video on television with the volume on high when talking to her friend. The sound of the cartoon video bars Christina from listening to her friend's speech, so it is an example of a communication interference noise. So did you see Christina's sister watching a cartoon video on television with a high volume while Christina is talking to her friend? So the barrier there or the noise there is that the high volume of the television that her sister watches. So the moment that it bars Christina from listening to her friend's speech, so it is an example of a communication interference or noise because it is a communication distraction, or it distracts Katrina from listening to her friend's speech. So next is situation, environment, or context. Is the time and place in which speech communication occurs. Also, the prime element of every communication process that controls the communication process among the sender and receivers. Example: Nelvi is talking to her friend, so she feels very comfortable. Therefore, the social context has been designed from this communication process. It is also interpersonal context as they communicated face to face. So, conclude, the 9 elements of communication process are speaker or sender, message, encoding, channel, listener or receiver, feedback, decoding, interference or noise, and situation or environment and or context. The communication process might be get faulty without any of these elements except noise, because noise is the unwanted communication element. That's all. Thank you.